I am very pleased to be here. Hard to believe this is my 15th appearance at an alumni leadership conference, and I have enjoyed and, more importantly, learned something at every one of them. But this morning we are celebrating having hit, as Ray has announced, the campaign goal, the revised campaign goal of $2 billion. And while I know there's lots of technicalities about what is and isn't the campaign, the fact is our alumni have been absolutely key to this, not only in terms of sheer dollars, but in participation. And I really want to emphasize what Tom said. Doesn't matter whether it's $100, $100 million, it's all important. And I'm very grateful for all of you who have participated in this campaign and will continue to support us both financially and through your efforts. We're very, very grateful. If you look back over the period of this campaign, when we started it, there was no Stata Center, there was no BC Brain and Cognitive Science Project, there was no Simmons Hall, there was no Sydney and Pacific, there was no Zessiger Center for Sports and Fitness. And by the way, I learned that just a couple of days ago, Barry Zessiger went to work out in the Zessiger Center, and her card was not valid, and she couldn't get in. But we're sticklers on policy around here. 20% of the endowed professorships, which are enormously important to us, did not exist. While we are short of our ambitions, and as Ray pointed out, our undergraduate financial coffers were not nearly as strong as they are today, and our graduate fellowship support was close to non-existent. There was no open courseware. There was no McGovern Institute for Brain Research. There was no Pickhour Center for Learning and Memory. There was no Broad Institute for Genomic Medicine. The Darbeloff Fund for Excellence in Education at MIT did not exist. There was no Microsoft iCampus project. There was no Singapore MIT Alliance. All of these things and many, many, many others are results of the work that all of you did under Ray's leadership during this campaign, and we are very grateful. There is one really important metric, and I'm going to embarrass myself because I'm only going to give it to you qualitatively, but Barbara and I have taken for the last couple of years the goal of our campaign, now accomplished, $2 billion, and divided that by the number of living alumni of this institution. And I want to tell you, we are off the charts. We are about a little north of 2.5 times that dollar per living alumni than one other major university in Cambridge, Massachusetts. You should be very proud of that. Now, because this is MIT, I want to be very clear, that does not imply that alumni gave every one of those dollars, but they sure gave a huge chunk of them. And we're very grateful for that, and the increasing engagement, participation rates bodes well for the future as well. Well, I want to tell you something. Last year, I was here at this event, and blushingly, I'm going to say that every now and then you connect with an audience. You know, something is on, and you feel great about your talk, and they sort of have to beat on me to make me stop. And when I finished, Beth got up, and honest to gosh, she said, "Well, Chuck's finally got this down pat. He must be ready to leave." Now, I knew that I was going to be announcing in 3 months that I was leaving. She didn't. So it was not cause and effect, but it was the great insight that we have come to appreciate from our president, Beth Garvin. So this morning, in that context, my life has indeed changed a little bit. This time last year, Henry Jenkins was my next-door neighbor, and it took me 5 minutes to get from home here. And this morning, the only neighbor I know lives across the street, and that's Derek Bach, and it took me 17 minutes to walk here. So Becky and my life is beginning to change, and therefore I thought I would spend a little bit of time this morning sort of as a lame duck looking backward and a bit forward as well. I noticed over the last 14 years a good way to take the temperature of what was going on was that morning every September, during which Becky and I greeted the parents of our incoming freshman class, and a few of the freshmen who happened to be awake early in the morning. This is something that you have to experience to believe. We shake hands and smile and make comments and ask questions and give answers for 5.5 straight hours. And so when we talk about torture and standing in one place and so forth, I can relate to that. But I learn a lot. And I noticed that for almost literally 10 years, every third or fourth or fifth parent would come through and they would shake hands and they'd look at me and say, "You look too young to be the president of MIT." And then about 5 years ago, I noticed they stopped saying that. And so I worried a little bit about this, and the next thing I knew, I noticed that everywhere I got introduced, when I gave a speech, I'd be introduced as one of the longest-serving presidents in the United States. So all these things, it wasn't just you, Beth, it was these other things together, led me to be here as the outgoing president and one who is very pleased and excited with my successor, who most, if not all of you, had a chance to meet yesterday. It's been a wonderful life serving as president of this great institution, and as I've emphasized over this last almost a year now, it is a life, it is not a job, and I think Susan Huckfield is very, very aware of that. And it's not always exactly what it seems to the casual observer who views you as the visionary leader of the institution. And this particularly came home to me last June, when, thanks to Beth and the leadership of the association, I was given that greatest of all Boston honors and opportunities to conduct the Boston Pops and the Stars and Stripes Forever. A few of you were probably there. And I went out on the stage, frankly, up until the very last minute, trying to decide, well, am I going to go out there and be my usual stage self, or should I really get into this thing? And so I decided, look, this is only going to happen once in a lifetime, so just go ahead and make a fool out of myself. So I did, and had a ball doing it. But halfway through, I started thinking, you know, if I put this baton down on the podium and walk off the stage, the music isn't going to change a bit. That is a very accurate metaphor for being the president of a great institution like this. The outside people think you're sort of the conductor of this great symphony, but you're not. It's not that you're totally unimportant, but that's not what you are, because a great university like MIT, if you want to carry this music metaphor, it's not an orchestra with a conductor. It's a great jazz jam session where everybody brings their own ideas and their own instruments to the table, and somehow they get into the groove and they make marvelous music together. And that's what our great faculty and student body and alumni body, in fact, do. We have brilliant faculty and brilliant students, as you know, and you as alumni bring a great set of energy and ideas and enthusiasm that are a very important part of this mix as well. I've noted over these last months, as people are sort of generating a lot of fluff in print and electronic version and so forth and so on, saying very kind things about me and about Becky and talking about, quote, and I do put it in quotes, what you'll be remembered for. It struck me, and this is a serious point, it struck me that I could not have predicted any of those things when I came here. And I think the reason is that the achievements of an institution are not that of the president, they are that of the faculty and the students and the alumni body. But what has pulled all these things together, in my humble opinion, is that we've generally remained quite true to a set of abiding principles that help to define MIT. Among these, are our commitment to excellence in all that we do, our commitment to diversity in all the dimensions and sense of that term, something I felt particularly passionate about during this period, our commitment to openness in education and research. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And something that every university in this country can say to some extent, but I believe the magnitude of its impact here at MIT is extraordinary and indeed unique, and that is our sense of service to the nation and to the world. We don't just look inward and do things for ourselves. We have great ideas, solve great problems, educate great people, and try to use all of those mechanisms for influencing the world in positive ways. So I want to very quickly reflect on a few examples of each of these, our commitment to excellence. Everybody I know who has been around here longer than I, among our deans and faculty and so forth, will tell you that our faculty has never been better than it is today. And that could be symbolized almost any week of the year, but this week, as you know, the past week, the so-called MacArthur Genius Grant Awards were announced for the year. 4 of them went to MIT-related people, 2 to people currently teaching here. One, Angela Belcher. Angie is one of the world's great, or the wonderful Amy Smith, who is a lecturer in the Edgerton Center and who has devoted her career in a very selfless way to developing technologies to assist the quality of human life in the developing world, thereby not only doing good directly, but being an enormous mentor, enormously powerful mentor and role model to many students. Also, a young professor from the Harvard Medical School who is an HST graduate and a member of our Broad Institute won one of these, and an alumna from the class of 88 or 89 who is a professor at Stanford. So we have great people. Our students, as was said earlier, have never been better, either as measured by their academic brilliance or by their engagement with the world in so many, many ways. And I'm pleased to say that young people appear to be finding MIT more attractive than ever. This is kind of an inside metric, but in our business, if you will, the most important number you can ever look at is your yield rate, the percentage of students you admit who actually enroll and come to MIT. I want to tell you that our goal for many years was to hit 60%, and this year we exceeded 65%. There are only about 3 other institutions that are close to that. And so something good is happening out there, and everybody was just enormously pleased about that, except, of course, the people responsible for housing the students. That caused a little problem. But we got through that in good MIT fashion. Our commitment to diversity. This is such an important topic that I hesitate just to say a word or two about it. But despite the fact that we remain far from what we hope MIT will be someday, you saw the statistics that Linda put. Now, everybody's got a different time frame. If you're a student, your time frame is sort of 4 or 5 years. You hardly see the institution changing. If you're a faculty member, an alumni, it's kind of a lifetime. But those changes on any historical scale are astounding. And one thing we are proud of is that we've had a very steady growth in the number of women in our faculty during these last 14 years. And especially, we have begun to move and build momentum in that dimension in the School of Engineering, moving from 9% of our faculty to 14% in the last 5 years alone. And we will continue that. We will not shrink from the challenge. But the biggest challenge we have, as really does our entire society, is bringing members of underrepresented communities into our faculty. This is our biggest challenge, and our faculty itself this last year recommitted itself to that effort, and we're all going to work for the long haul to be sure that eventually we get to the kind of goals we want to think in terms of there. We're so proud of the diversity in every dimension of our student body. You walk down the halls and just look at the faces, and it's so full of energy and vitality. And if you live here day in, day out, you kind of begin to take this as natural. But I tell you, as I go around the country and visit a lot of other campuses, you don't walk away with that feeling. So that diversity from culture and national origin, geography and race and economic background and on, worldview, is a real driving force for the vitality of this institution. And of course, MIT faculty continue to do extraordinary things, teaching and researching even on the issue of diversity itself. Later this morning, you're going to hear a presentation by one of our great faculty members, Shigeru Miyagawa, about an exciting project on cultural identity. Openness. Openness in research and education. When the campaign was just getting ready to form, I went around the country and had 14 what we called consultation dinners with small groups of alumni in different cities around the U.S. to kind of try out what we thought the case statement should be, what we thought the needs of the institution were, and to learn how to communicate them well, but more importantly, to get people's idea of, as alumni, what they thought was important. And seriously, at every one of those dinners, the first question was, what is MIT going to do about the use of information technology, the World Wide Web, and the Internet, and so forth, in its education? And 14 times I had to give the answer, well, I really don't know. And that was about where we were, because we could have all said something blithe or follow the pack. But soon thereafter, our faculty answered that question in the guise of a group that was largely a faculty group, but also had other stakeholders, including representatives of the association. And today you will hear from one of the people who conceived and drove what MIT's real answer to this is, and that is MIT's Open Courseware project. And because Dick Yu is going to talk about this, I'll kind of skip by it really fast, except to say there's no single thing that I have personally been more passionately excited about in these 14 years than OCW. Its impact, as you will hear, is enormous. All you have to do is skim through a few of the 20,000 emails we received thanking us for doing this, look at where they came from, who they came from. It's a tremendous accomplishment on the part of our faculty, and I think you'll be very interested in what Dick has to say in a few minutes. But there are other forms of openness that I'm deeply concerned about. You all know I'm always an optimist, but there are problems out there. This nation, understandably, has come into great tensions after the horrific attacks on our country in 9/11. And it's caused us to, in some ways, I believe, overreact in the policies and procedures we put in place for granting visas, for letting students and more complicated still, visitors to scientific and technical meetings and so forth in and out of our country, crossing our borders. It's caused some real deep problems that are rather esoteric. We could talk about a little bit offline in the area of export control, where any student born in other countries who comes and does research, and in that research comes in contact with equipment or processes that somebody in Washington may dream has something to do with building terrorist weapons in other nations, becomes a so-called deemed export, and we have to apply for an export license for that student to take the course or do the work. We're pushing back very hard on these things in partnership with our government because we know they're trying to do the right thing. But believe me, we are pushing back very hard to keep this kind of policy from snowballing in nonsensical ways. And if you ask yourself why, the answer is very simple. The openness of our nation, and especially our universities, for 2 centuries to people from other countries to come here to study, to become part of our faculty, of our industry base, of our entrepreneurship, of our entire civic undertaking, that openness is really what has defined and made this a great nation. It certainly is what has made MIT a great university. All you have to do, if you get an argument with people who don't think this way, just say, what are we in some sense most proud of? Our Nobel laureates on our faculty. And if you look at the MIT faculty who have earned the Nobel Prize while they have been here, many indeed have been born in the U.S., but they've also been born in Germany, in Mexico, in Italy, in Japan. It is that international flavor to MIT that gives it so much of its greatness, and we just all have to work together in a way that's appropriately patriotic and duty-bound, but we still have to do the hard work to be sure that we can remain that. And also, as Linda pointed out, I hope that this institution will forever remain committed to the kind of openness that comes in the guise of the way we do our financial aid, admitting students on the basis of their merit, and dispersing our undergraduate financial aid on the basis of need. This, too, is a way of keeping us open and creating opportunity for young men and women, regardless of their financial background. Service to our nation and world. Technology, by virtually all economic studies, is responsible for somewhere around 50% plus of the economic growth during the last 60 years. Technological innovation, much of it driven out of universities like this. As Linda pointed out, take a look around here at what's happening in biotechnology, with about 70 extant companies in biology or pharmaceutical R&D within a mile of where we're sitting here this morning. Look at MIT's contribution to the World Wide Web, which, as you know, the consortium that maintains the protocols and defines the web is housed here in CSAIL over in the Stata Center. Look at the work of the Singapore MIT Alliance, the Cambridge MIT Institute, programs of the Sloan School in China, and so forth. Reaching out, drawing in across open boundaries, either in cyberspace or physically, is very important. And look at the service that we will provide over time through undertakings like the New Broad Institute, which has the very real goal of putting a serious basis of science under the practice of much of human medicine over the coming decades, the next stage in the development of genomic medicine. The McGovern Institute, the Picower Center, doing basic research to be sure, but research that will also in due course have profound implications for human communication and learning, and especially human mental and emotional health. Service to our nation and world. Finally, there are both challenges and opportunities ahead. The challenges this institution will have to face over the coming few years includes, as I've already said, maintaining our openness to international students and scholars, maintaining the affordability of higher education. In some sense, the biggest challenge of all always has been and always will be being competitive to attract the very best faculty and the very best students to our campus. There will be ongoing struggles for appropriate levels of support from the federal government for what we do at institutions like MIT, because the domestic discretionary budget is shrinking, and also, frankly, because of the growth, the very rapid growth again in Congress, of earmarked academic projects which come at the expense of projects that should be earned through the marketplace of ideas by smart faculty and students and staff. Our broad relationship with the federal government will continue to need tending. We must never stop explaining what we do, how we do it, and why it's important. So as all of you and all of us who live and work here undertake these, working to meet these challenges, I want to share a strange little life lesson I learned from the architect Frank Gehry. A year and a half ago, Bob Brown, John Curry, Nancy Joyce, Vicki Sirianni, and myself spent about 2 hours with Frank going through the Stata Center, which was just beginning to have its internal work looking somewhat close to completion. And we were standing up in the 4th or 5th floor in some sort of random conference room. And I said to Frank, arguably the world's greatest architect, tell me something. I understand how you program a building. I've been engaged in that many times, how you set the requirements and the spatial relations. I understand a little bit how you mass that building to get its basic structure. And I leave it up to people like you to build in the aesthetics and so forth. But how do you get from that sort of broad beginning to the kind of detail I see here? Because everywhere you look in that building, even though internally it's very simple in its use of materials and so forth, there's always an interesting angle. You stop and think, why did he put this window here? There's a shaft of light coming in and something. I said, how do you do that? And he looked at me and he said, Chuck, I built 27 models of this room. So I tell every student I talk to that story because it says the grand vision, the big ideas, the aesthetics, all these things are very, very important. But at the end of the day, it takes the hard, slogging, detailed, day-to-day work, and that's what we all learn to do, and that's what we do. In closing, there's so many opportunities out there, I don't even want to begin to list them. This, as I said to you last year, I firmly believe is the most exciting era in human history in terms of science and technology, what we can learn, how we can apply those learnings to solving major problems, whether it be in neuroscience or information science or nanotechnology, the genetic revolution, our oceans, energy for a planet, feeding the world, the environment. There are just so many things out there. New modes of learning. While we have done a few things with new styles of learning and new ways of using information technology, we've just scratched the surface, in my view. More is coming. But in reality, it's not really up to the president of an institution to really define what those opportunities are and what we go after. I remember that time about a dozen years ago when Gerhard Casper, who was then the president of Stanford, called me up one day. We used to talk every few weeks. And he called me up and he said, I want to tell you something. If one more person asks me what my vision for Stanford University is, I'm quitting. And I knew exactly what he was saying because everybody wants to know what your vision is. But the fact is, in a great institution, the vision comes from within. The vision comes up out of the faculty, out of the students, sometimes out of the staff, out of the alumni. And the senior administration and the president in particular has to listen very much to begin to shape this, to bring some coherence to it. But the great ideas come from within. But in 1998, we did pull together such a vision statement, if you will, in the form of a report that I drafted after having listened and consulted a lot, called The Path to Our Future. And I think that did a good job of taking what we were hearing from within, building a little coherence, and giving a plan with which we moved forward. We've accomplished a lot of what was in that vision, but it's been all of you who have really done this. And I get occasional emails from one of my faculty colleagues I'm very fond of, who likes to pass along observations of the passing scene and sometimes a little loving criticism of the institution and so forth. and she always addresses me as Chief Symbol, with a capital C and a capital S. So to end this morning, I just want to say that even though she means that a little bit laughingly, I take it very seriously. I think that is maybe the most important part of the job that I have had. It has been an enormous privilege to be your chief symbol and to represent you around the country and around the world. Thank you very much.
President Vest will now introduce the panel.
Just in time delivery. I'm going to very quickly and informally introduce each of our three panel members this morning, and then just let them follow each other to make their introductory presentations. The first speaker will be someone I referred to a bit ago, Professor Dick Yu, who is Professor of Hydrodynamics and Ocean Engineering and has served for the last several years very effectively as Associate Dean of the School of Engineering. His main research contributions are in theoretical and computational hydrodynamics. But Dick is here this morning because he played really a key role, I might even say the key role, in formulating and developing the concept of open courseware. Following Professor Yu, the next speaker will be someone else. I referred to all three of you, so why am I saying that? Will be Professor Shigeru Miyagawa, a professor of linguistics, and the Koji Manjiro Professor of Japanese Language and Culture. He's the executive producer of Star Festival, a multimedia program about cultural identity that is being used here at MIT and has been adopted by public schools from Boston to Hawaii, as well as having won numerous awards. In 1995, Shigeru won the Erwin Sizer Award for the most significant contribution to MIT education. And this year, he won the Class of 1960 Innovation in Education Award. The final formal presentation will be by Professor Henry Jenkins. Henry is the John E. Burchard Professor of Humanities and the Director of the Comparative Media Studies program, a program he really conceived and built. He is also the author of monthly columns for Technology Review Online and for Computer Games Magazine. He is one of the founders and directors of the Education Arcade, which examines the educational potential of computer and video games. So I'm now going to turn to our three panelists and ask them each to make a bit of a formal presentation. Then when all three have finished, we'll open things up for Q&A with the audience.
Thank you, Chuck. When Linda mentioned that MIT alums are sticky, then I think I might belong to the group called Crazy Glue. Over 33, 34 years ago, I came as a freshman and somehow never managed to leave. The bonding may be permanent, I'm afraid, at this point. Linda also mentioned how MIT has changed in the past 30-some years. There's one change she did not mention, and it's the fact that the change in the size of these chairs that you are sitting in lecture hall like these. When I was taking freshman chemistry in the same lecture hall, I used to remember I would slosh around in my chair with room for my books and what else. These days, it feels snug. I assure you, it's not us. It's MIT. Anyway, today I'm here to report to you on about a project that makes me extremely proud to be an MIT alum, to be an MIT faculty. And this project is the MIT Open Courseware project. This project also makes me very proud about the vision and courage and leadership of our senior administration, especially Chuck Vest. This project also makes me very proud of my colleagues, the other faculty, for their dedication and their generosity to education, to the cause of education, not just at MIT, not just in this country, but worldwide. So OpenCourseware would not have been without people like Chuck leading us, and it certainly would have gone nowhere were it not for faculty who have really supported it. So I think we should acknowledge, give credit to where credit belongs. So anyway, let me just start. I've prepared a few slides, and there's not much time, and probably less time than I had thought, so I'm going to go relatively quickly. I'm just going to cover quickly the basic idea. It's very simple, could be explained in a minute. Some of the accomplishments that have been made, and concentrate a little bit on the kind of impact that we are beginning to see. And I just want to mention to you that this is very early in the game. It's only in very recent months that we have hundreds of courses. For the longest time, we had no courses, and for over a year, we had 50 courses. So you should calibrate that against the time that has transpired, and I think we have every reason to be excited about it and to look forward to bigger and better things that will come out of this project. The vision is simple. In April of 2001, MIT announced to the world that we will publish all our course material, all the course content that we used to teach at MIT on the web to the world for free. As Chuck said in one of this quote, OpenCourseware looks counterintuitive. In fact, OpenCourseware was conceived in the summer of 2000. If you look back that time, that was at the height of the dot-com bubble, where not only companies, corporations, but many of our peer universities were really going the other way, 180 degrees the other way, full speed. And MIT decided that we would buck the trend, and in that way became a real leader, I believe, and a real example for a university for the 21st century. But having said that, I should also point out that OpenCourseware is completely consistent with what we believe is MIT. It is innovative, and it expresses our dedication to our mission in education. It took a lot of people and a lot of effort for that vision to come to reality, not the least of which are two foundations, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, who had supported us and will continue to support us. Today, I believe that we have already received either in hand or in pledges the support that we will need to see to it that we will be able to put all our courses on the web. MIT will keep its promise as a result of the generosity of these foundations. In the September of 2002, as I mentioned, we started with 50 courses. It took us another year to really build that to 500 courses. Today, if you go to the MIT OpenCourseware, you will see over 900 courses, probably over 50% of all the courses that we have on the site. Many of you may not have heard of OpenCourseware, and I just wanted to be clear about what we are trying to do. OpenCourseware is not an MIT education. It is not intended to represent the interactive, the excitement of an education on campus. It could not. It certainly is not a distance education initiative. It's not a business enterprise that we've entered into. OpenCourseware, rather, for MIT, is merely a chance for us to influence the world by sharing with them material that we have, our content. We could not admit more than 1,000 freshmen a year, or at least somebody would be very stressed if we admitted even a few hundred more. We certainly could not deliver the kind of quality education to more than a few thousand students at a time, but we certainly could play a tremendous role impacting thousands and thousands and tens of thousands and perhaps millions of learners and educators worldwide. This is what MIT OpenCourseware is about. It is open and available to the world and it is a permanent MIT activity. People have asked, why does MIT do OpenCourseWare? The answer is different from different people, but I think we can capture it in a few bullets. It really is very consistent with our fundamental mission in education, in the generation and the open dissemination of knowledge. It really embraces the faculty's value, the faculty's dedication to teaching, to sharing our best practices and know-how with the greater learning and education community, and in contributing to their fields and their discipline through this project. This doesn't sound like why is MIT doing it, but in a way it is, because OpenCourseWare is MIT's way of saying that a modern university like MIT has a kind of special obligation that is particularly important and is threatened by the developments of the last decade or so, namely the privatization of knowledge and the movement around us that increasingly compartmentalize information and access to knowledge that we are trying to, in some sense, become a stalwart against. This is a quick chart. I think I've already mentioned the major milestones. What I want to point out to you is that we will keep our promise that in a few years' time, 2-3 years' time, we would have published all our courses. And there is a very exciting and difficult phase going down the road beyond 2007, 2008, where we will be maintaining OpenCourseWare, updating it, revising it, adding new courses, and keeping it current for both our own students and for the world. It's difficult to put the accomplishments of OpenCourseWare in a few slides, and I thought maybe we could use a few charts that show statistics and numbers, and we could also do some qualitative things like cite a few quotes. So I'll do a little bit of both. There are a lot more where they came from, so if you're very interested, send me an email. First, we have published over 900 courses now. It represents both breadth in terms of all the academic disciplines that MIT has. It represents all the departments, all the schools, all 5 schools. It also represents depth in the sense that many of the sites have a rich amount of material, syllabus, lecture notes, exams, problem sets. Many sites have some videos of the lecturers lecturing. Other sites have included tools and simulations, applets, and there are even a few sites where entire books are put on the site. The faculty decided that it's much better for them to publish the book on OpenCourseWare than to do it with a traditional publisher on paper. MIT OpenCourseWare, even in its sort of still relatively, maybe not infancy, but still as a toddler, has already received a lot of recognition. Some of these recognitions are kind of embarrassing or surprising to us because they are traditionally given to commercial web sites. So we've won awards for the design of the site, for the use of the site. I was in Washington this summer, and Computer World acknowledged MIT OpenCourseWare as a 21st century achievement. Computer World. So we weren't thinking when we talked about OpenCourseWare to be a web, a computer something, and these awards keep coming in. A lot of this credit goes to the very able staff of the OpenCourseWare office. They've really done a very high quality job to showcase MIT. I mentioned that I will show some figures. This is one of the figures. This gives you an idea of the number of visits to the OpenCourseWare site. The number averaging about 500,000 visits a month. And again, I want to point out that this is really showing the full history, more or less, of when we had courses. Most of this history were when we had fairly small number of courses. Another way to think about it is the global impact. This shows in millions the number of visits to the MIT OpenCourseWare. Suffice it to say that we have received visits from every country on Earth, every one of the 7 continents, including Antarctica. we were quite surprised by the numbers of visits from Antarctica until someone reminded us that probably everybody on Antarctica has an MIT degree. We actually went out and did an assessment of how people use the site. We asked about who they are, and a large number of them identified themselves as educator, our peers, other professors and so forth. A large fraction of them are self-learners, and many of them are students. Students are people who are taking courses in their own home university or college, but they are using MIT OpenCourseWare to help themselves. And when we asked about how they use it, it was exactly as we thought that they would use it. So MIT OpenCourseWare has not been hijacked for some other purpose, like sometimes you find things on the web. But educators are using it to help them develop or teach a course, to help them advance their own personal knowledge, help them to plan curriculum, and so forth. Students are using it to complement their own learning, to enhance their knowledge, and so forth. And a large contingent of them are self-learners. Maybe many of you would visit MIT OpenCourseWare and, again, revisit the learning experience you had when you were at MIT, and they were using it to really advance their own understanding and knowledge of subjects that maybe that was not even around when they were students. The data is remarkable. The numbers are just awesome. It's astronomically great, right? 92% of the visitors are really satisfied with the quality of the material. 95% of them says they would come back again and again to the site for future. 99% of them, of the visitors, find the experience extremely positive or moderately positive on their education and on their idea of how education would be impacted around the globe. 40% of them says that they will use or reuse this material themselves. 76% of the educators agree that MIT OpenCourseWare has or will have an impact on their own teaching. This is the fun part. This is the qualitative part. First caveat, I did not pick the quotes. Perhaps they were not picked randomly either, but I thought they are fun, and I'd ask Anne Margulies, Executive Director of OpenCourseWare, to please give them to me. According to users, MIT OpenCourseWare is the 8th wonder of the world, the big bang of the knowledge universe, the greatest thing any institution of higher education has ever done, like falling in love, the coolest thing on the internet, worthy of the next Nobel Peace Prize. If you have connections, I would like right now to nominate Chuck Vest for it, for the next Nobel Peace Prize. This is a self-learner from India. If you were to list all the adjectives available in all the languages on earth, it will still not explain completely the user's feeling about viewing this website. This is a posting from one of the schools on the West Coast. Next time, if the president of Stanford calls you, Chuck, mention this to him. These are just select posts. One of the posting is, here is another awesome link to 6976 high-speed communication circuits and systems from MIT OpenCourseWare. Extremely good. Best notes I've ever seen. Darn interesting. I mean, that must include the notes that he is seeing in class now, of course, right? And to respond, the other maybe student, I hope it's not a professor, well, that is why MIT is the best school of engineering on the planet. And I thought I would, this is a little bit too much, I'm blushing. So we need to move to some, so I thought I would just include some quotes from alumnus, which are also very supportive. This is a Course8 alumnus. This is absolutely fantastic. It's been 20 years since I studied some of these subjects. I've forgotten a lot of this. It's a relief to know that there's Courseware available for me to regain some of what I have forgotten. Of course, this is a very unique alumnus. Most of you would not have forgotten anything you've learned at MIT. A Sloan alum, again, says, I'm very happy to see that Sloan and MIT are not worried about sharing knowledge. It's not characteristic of MIT to be worried about sharing knowledge. It is never as good as being there, of course, but to be with the students and professors, but it's valuable and beneficial, and it should be distributed as wide as possible. This is an alum from Brazil. As an alum from a developing country, I'm proud of the beauty, lacking a truly significant word, of this extremely generous and wise MIT initiative. I'm a Great Dome associate. I'm very impressed and proud that MIT is doing this. Keep up the good work. This is a wonderful resource for those like me who wish to continue learning long after they have left the MIT campus. Through OCW, I am now taking classes I've always wanted to take, but never could because of my schedule. Thanks. I want to add that there was a conversation over the break. Someone came to me and said, could I learn? MIT alum probably could benefit more from MIT OpenCourseWare than the average citizen, because you are one of us. You are our kind. You can understand the notation and the symbol. You don't have to figure out, where do I find linear algebra? It's 1806, of course. There are a lot of benefits internally. It has impacted MIT internally and externally. It has enhanced our own teaching, our own way of communicating. In the interest of time, I'll just show you a very interesting statistic. This is the usage internally of MIT OpenCourseWare site by students and faculty and so forth. And what you see is a peak around September, around registration day. And at first we weren't sure why, and now we figure there are two possibilities. Faculty are checking up on their colleagues to see what they're planning to do. First check out the competition across the hall or downstairs. And students are using OpenCourseWare as a way of finding out how to select courses, perhaps checking out some of the homework problems to see if they are up to it, maybe getting a head start on all their other friends. So you can see that OpenCourseWare is being used even internally in a very robust way. Looking forward, we plan to be continually adding courses. We will be adding another 200 or so courses within less than 6 months. And I just wanted to spend a few minutes, I know I have very limited time, to point at the last bullet, the International OpenCourseWare Consortium. To our knowledge, OpenCourseWare now is being actively translated in about a dozen languages. There is a consortium of Spanish universities who are translating into Spanish and Portuguese. A group of our alumni in Taiwan is actively banding together to translate it into Chinese. I just went to a conference in Shanghai where 100 universities were represented there. They wanted to get together and translate MIT OpenCourseWare to Chinese, not only for themselves, but for many regional learners in this region of Asia, which read or use Chinese. And as we speak, some of our peer universities are seriously thinking of doing MIT OpenCourseWare or OpenCourseWare themselves. And I hope to be able to tell you, maybe way sooner than next time you come, about who they are and some of the excitement I think that their joining the OpenCourseWare movement will generate around the world. Thank you. Go to ocw.mit.edu. If you didn't hear anything else, just remember ocw.mit.edu. And I was asked to, so with due apologies, I was asked that if you are still here on Monday, there is a reception in this same room at 4 o'clock. Bill Bowen, the president of one of our sponsoring foundations, will be giving a keynote presentation, and there will be a special acknowledgement of Chuck Vest and Bob Brown for their leadership and support of OpenCourseWare. You are all invited. Thank you.
Good morning. konnichiwa. My goodness. Your foreign language requirement is now met. You may pick up your degree as you walk out. I'd like to talk today about a topic which has been mentioned by both Linda and Chuck, and that is the topic of living in a increasingly diverse society. I'd like to tell you about a project that I did, which involves a number of people from MIT, and it's a project which is now being used in schools, urban schools in this country. Let me give you just a little bit of background before I show you a little bit of Star Festival. That's the name of the project. Some years back, I was involved in a project which took me into classrooms, elementary school and junior high classrooms in Boston, New York, and many other big urban school systems. And there was something very striking about walking into one of those classrooms. As soon as you walk in, you knew right away, looking around, that more than half of the students were minority. The majority minority, as Linda put it. Okay. African American, Asian, Hispanic, Latino, Native American. Okay. You knew that right away. And when you started to talk to the remainder, you found out that some of them just immigrated from Russia and so forth. Okay. And so what we have in these urban school systems is a rich diversity, unprecedented in this country. Okay. That was the first striking thing that I discovered in doing this project. The second thing that I discovered was that these young people, despite the diversity, were not talking about it. They were not talking about the fact that they are a Chinese, Latino, and so forth. Okay? They skirted that issue. And this is something that the teachers, everywhere I went, told me about. And when you think about it, it's understandable. These are kids who are at an age, we've all been there, we don't want to be different. We don't want to be treated differently. Okay? We want to be the same. But it really seemed to me that given this diversity, that it's a shame to have these young people be in such an environment and not to deal with it at the age that they were, elementary school kids. In fact, it wasn't just a shame. It seemed unnatural to me that all these kids with cultural, ethnic, racial identities who are not expressing themselves as who they were in this environment. Okay? As they grow up, if they come to MIT, as they go into the society, they're going to be facing the same diverse society. And it would be wonderful if we can have young people at that young age begin to deal with diversity. Okay? And so I started to think about what can I do to help these young people. And of course, when you do a project, the first thing you have to do is to come up with the right metaphor so that you can always stay on the message and the team is staying on the message. Okay? The traditional metaphor in this country for diversity is the melting pot. Okay? And in fact, if I have one of you see on the back of the penny in Latin, one from many. That's the melting pot metaphor. It's on the penny. That didn't seem like the right metaphor for today. You want to respect the differences. You want to celebrate differences. Another metaphor that I heard a lot in the schools was salad. Okay? And that seemed a little bit closer to what I was looking for. Okay? So you have the cucumber, the lettuce, the tomato. They all keep their integrity. That seemed about right. But there was one thing that bothered me about that metaphor, and that is that the cucumbers and the lettuce and the tomatoes never interacted with each other. They're always separate. Okay? So balkanized. And so I turned to one of my favorite writers, Mark Twain. And he had exactly the right metaphor. And his metaphor is the stew. Okay? In a good stew, a potato keeps its integrity as a potato, but at the same time, it takes on the taste of the carrot, the onion, the meat, and so forth. That's a good stew. Okay? So a potato is both a potato and everything else. So it's integrated into the environment, but still keeping its identity. And that's exactly what I wanted to achieve. Okay? And so I put together a team, wonderful group of MIT people to create Star Festival. Okay? As you will see, it's a personal exploration of my own cultural identity, which I use as a model for young people. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. We just need to. Thanks.
July 7th, 120th year. Finally, the 7th day of the 7th month has arrived. It's a beautiful, clear day, so the Tanabata lovers will probably meet. I feel like I've made a journey too, from my adopted culture, back to my roots. Am I American or Japanese? Or American and Japanese? Maybe, like the magpies of the Tanabata myth, I'm a bridge between two cultures. I thought I knew all about Japan, and I realize now I just made a lot of assumptions.
Okay, so that's the beginning of Star Festival. I came to this country, this is true, I came to this country when I was 10 from Japan, and I lived here for my adult life. And so I went back to Japan with this high-tech PDA that was produced by MIT. And in order to try to figure out who I am I Japanese or am I American? Okay? And so I go and find memories of who I am in order to find out what my part of my core identity is. Now, looking around, I see that you're probably of the age where you may recognize the voice of me. No, at MIT you find amazing people, Nobel laureates and MacArthur fellows. There's only one who can say that he's been played by Mr. Sulu of Star Trek. That's me. Okay. It was such a wonderful experience to work with George. Okay. And so you are the user. The footsteps that you heard, that's your footsteps. You come upon this PDA, which I dropped during the Star Festival. It's a street festival in Japan. The Star Festival is a old Chinese myth. It's a wonderful mythology where it's a Romeo and Juliet of Asia. A boy and a girl fall in love from the wrong side of the tracks. And the family are upset, and they toss the boy and girl into two different constellations. And unbeknownst to the families, the two constellations come together every July. And the Star Festival is to celebrate this coming together. And I thought that was the right metaphor. Okay? And so I dropped this PDA, and so you pick it up. Okay. We wanted to put MIT here, but that's we couldn't do that because it's patented name. So.
Welcome to the PDA prototype XLV7. You are in.
So this is a PDA interface that we created, and because I dropped it, you can see that some functions are broken, like the record function. I used this to teach a course in the comparative media studies, one of the exciting new programs, which Henry Jenkins is the director of, and I'm waiting on to see if this year if one of the students will fix this function that's broken. Hasn't happened yet. Okay. One of the ways in which you can navigate through, this is my hometown, is by this map. And we go to an interview.
グラフはね、29の B29 ね。The B29 bomber was right overhead us on the way to Tokyo. When they came, sirens went off, and we had to turn off all the lights. We went into the launch shelter when it was really dangerous. 空襲のあった時はもちろん地下の家みたいなよね。On the day Hiroshima was bombed, I was sleeping on the second floor of my Mitw home. We were shouting, "Wake up, wake up, the bombing is starting." When I looked out, the downtown area was all lit up with fire. それからもう、そうね、その時になんか持って逃げなきゃいけないっていうね。I knew everything would be burned, so I wanted to take something with me. I grabbed whatever was on the desk. When I looked later, it was a pair of scissors. I wish I had taken something more valuable.
Okay, so that's really my mother, and I carry the CD with me. You know, I know it has my mother in it, and so it keeps me from going astray, I guess, whenever I'm out there. This is one of many stories that we captured. I went with someone from the Media Lab, it's a documentary filmmaker, to capture my identity, okay, as a Japanese. And this particular story has generated a number of interesting stories as we use this in the school systems, and it helped us to achieve the kind of the stew, if you will, that I was hoping to achieve. Let me finish up with a story of this story that you just heard, as it was used in a Boston public school elementary school. There was a 5th grade girl, a Chinese American, who had before never talked about the fact that she was Chinese. She saw this clip, and she was asked to go and interview her grandparents to find out something about her heritage as a way of building her cultural identity. And so she went and did that, and she came back and told us about the fact that her grandparents, her grandmother, suffered under the Japanese occupation. And it was a very moving, very powerful story that she told. It was a very striking story. But there was a couple of things that I was particularly struck by. Okay. One is that she identified herself as Chinese as she talked about this. It's the first time the teacher said that she said that she was Chinese. Okay. That was important to me. The second thing was that once she got this story out, okay, she went on to read 32 books about Japan. The teacher had said that she had never seen such such a thing. She learned whatever she could about Japan. Okay? It's as if she was waiting. She was curious about Japan, but this very strong feeling, which she could not get out until this point, kept her from learning about a country that she was curious about. And so we had exactly the right combination. She was able to express herself in her cultural identity of being Chinese, living in this country, but at the same time, she was starting to take on the environment, in this case, Japan. Okay? Taking on the taste around her so that she could start to interact with her environment in a productive manner. I think that there was a real education that took place there. Okay? I do this at MIT as well, and what we find is that grandkids of those people who suffered, whatever terrible experiences that grandparents went through, the grandkids have extremely strong feelings, okay? Distilled to a pure emotion. And I find it always that these young people are able to produce very powerful narrative. But once they get it out, then they become a different person. And it's my hope that by so doing, they're able to then integrate themselves a little bit better into this diverse society. Okay. Thank you so much.
All right, there you go. So, now that I have your attention, I usually begin talks by acknowledging that as far as the world is concerned, I'm a walking, talking oxymoron. I'm a humanist from MIT. But what's remarkable about this particular panel is that you've got two humanists from MIT talking to the Institute's alums about the work that we're doing in education. And I think that reflects some of the shifts that have taken place in the role of humanities over the last 10 to 15 years, that we are reaching out and trying to connect in serious ways to the core missions of MIT. There were more, as technological change and media change in particular has affected all segments of our society, there is a growing need to understand the social and cultural ramifications of the work that takes place at the Institute. And we struggle to do that in ways that connect to our core disciplines and our core ways of thinking. So the distinctive voices come out of that oxymoronic status we have as humanists at MIT. That is, neither fish nor fowl create something different in our disciplines and for MIT. And I think that's what's reflected by the fact that both Shigeru and I are on the panel here today. So I'm here to talk about comparative media studies very briefly and then get into one of our specific projects. Comparative media studies is now in its 6 years as a master's program, and it is now in completing its first year as an undergraduate major. We now are the largest major in the humanities side of the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Science. We're up to 28 majors at the present time, from 0 a year ago. We're for the first time seeing MIT freshmen coming to the Institute with a desire to major in what we teach. And for humanists at MIT, that was the gold standard for a long time, because we got very few people arriving at MIT who wanted to major in literature or foreign languages or history, and now they're coming to want to major in what we do. Now, what is comparative media studies? It's trying to help people understand the big picture of media in our society today. Its social, its cultural ramifications, its ethical ramifications, legal, political, economic. It tries to think across media, across historical periods, across national borders. It tries to bring practitioners and theorists together. We really take seriously the thinking and making motto of the Institute. We try to bring a lot of practitioners into our classes, and we try to bring our students into the world. And our motto is applied humanism. Right? MIT has applied physics, it has applied mathematics. What it needs is an applied subfield of the humanities that takes what humanists know about social and cultural issues and puts them into practice in the sites where media change is taking place, whether that's in industry, whether it's in the schools, whether it's in policy making, whether it's in journalism, whether it's the arts community. We're trying to bring an MIT brand of humanities out to society in a way that's engaged in real change. And that's the vision of the program. Education Arcade is one important piece of that. We've got research initiatives on globalization, on democracy, on media change more generally, around humanities computing, education around convergence and its impact on on popular culture. And now we have a space devoted to video games and their potential contribution to education. We started this 3 years ago with help from the Microsoft iCampus project. It's kept alive now through help from alumni contributions primarily. It's a project that we've become national leaders in terms of thinking about the pedagogical use of computer and video games. And I just got back from the National Science Foundation, which is a strange place for humanists to find themselves, but they were trying to put together a call for funding for games in education, largely based on the catalyst that our group provided 3 years ago. And they're catching up with what seems to be a national movement to think differently on these questions. So let me show you how it got started for me. I'm a parent, like many, and like many of you in the room, I noticed a couple of things. One was that my son quickly dispatched his homework, but would stay up all night if he got challenged on a video game, right? I noticed that the worst thing you could say about a homework assignment was it was too hard, and the worst thing you could say about a video game was it was too easy. Those are kind of important insights in terms of where the kids of his generation are. I bought him this game because I like Doonesbury and I like politics. He went up to his room and disappeared for the better part of the weekend. It's a game where you could plan a presidential campaign, you choose from 100 real politicians, put together their platforms, plan state by state, hour by hour, their travels, the end of which the Electoral College determines the outcome, right? No hanging chads, but the Electoral College determines the outcome, right? And your score is, how the Electoral College. So this was a few years back, so my wife and I were sitting down watching CNN. He comes trooping down and says, oh, I understand. Dole's in Florida, Gore's in California, Clinton's in New Jersey. That's because they have high electoral state value. And this was well before Florida, when most Americans discovered this. It was real education, as far as I could see. So his school had a policy. He wanted to take it to school and share it with his classmates. And his school has a policy. You can take educational software to school, but you can't play games on the school computers. So what happened? He brought it to school, and that game on the box led the librarian to say, you can't bring this game to school. And that sort of was a wake-up call for me. Here's this powerful medium that kids are using to learn, good or bad, that it's being locked out of the schools because of fear and panic and because of a sense of its trivialization. And yet it's capable of doing much more than we ever asked it to do. And that's what I wanted Education Arcade to try to do. The second origin story is this one, right? In the late 1950s, Sputnik goes up. American television, still a new medium. It's being called the vast wasteland. Bell Science Labs got together and created an incredible array of science films that aired in prime time on network television and then circulated in schoolrooms for the next decade. And as a kid, I'm not much of a science geek, but I loved those films. They were made by Frank Capra. They were made by Jack Warner. They were Chuck Jones. And they were called Operation Frontal Lobe. And I said, if you were to build Operation Frontal Lobe today, what media would you choose? Television was in its infancy when these things were made. Games are still new now, but the medium that's going to reach the current generation of kids, the new Operation Frontal Lobe, is going to be through games. Go back a little further, I think the great science educator of the 20th century was Hugo Gernsback, the father of science fiction, because he created a space where science and fiction matched, were joined. He had a vision of popular science education. He was trying to use popular culture to get people to think critically about science and ask core questions. And if you think about what drives students to MIT, it is in part science fiction. So again, if we think about the relationship of popular culture and education, we need to examine video games very, very closely. We did some studies of MIT freshmen. We discovered 100% of MIT freshmen had played video games before they came to MIT. Right? Now, that's first you can say, of course, it's MIT. And the second thing is, if you ask most educators if you could play video games and get into MIT, they'd probably say no. Right? The perception of the medium is very different from that. And then you think, what about all those countries around the world we've been hearing about all morning? This is not just an American phenomenon. This is a global phenomenon where kids are arriving playing video games. So the Pew Foundation did a more extensive survey. They studied 25 American colleges and universities. They found that all of the students on all of those universities they surveyed had played video games. 70% of them played video games at least once in a while. 65% of them were regular or occasional game players. Close to half of them said that gaming keeps them from studying. Some were a lot, and 1 in 10 admitted that was the main motivation for playing the game. Right? And this is the one that's going to gall us, right? 1/3 of students surveyed admitted playing video games that were not part of instructional activities during classes. Right? And I suddenly wake up and I realize that the students are playing the games and we're not allowed to participate. So we need to turn that around and get the teachers involved in playing games with their students if we're going to take advantage of this medium. Now, I don't know what generation of games you're most likely to be thinking about as I talk. You could be the generation that thinks about Pac-Man or Tetris. You could be the generation that's worried about Quake. You could be the group that's thinking about baseball bats and Grand Theft Auto. But there are more than games industry than that, and Civilization 3 is a classic example of a game that really allows you to work through global history, to run countries, to think about the development of civilizations. One of our colleagues, Kurt Squire, took this into inner city schools. Kids performed 2 years below grade level and used them to teach world history. These were kids who hated history, right? And they came out of it not only enthusiastic about history, but organically in the discussion, some 300 plus vocabulary words that are on the standards, the national and state standards for social science emerged organically through the conversation. They had a better sense of the logic of history. It's not good for factual recall necessarily, but the notion of territory and resources and trade and war and how those affect the development of civilization came through in a very dramatic way as he taught that class. And what excited them the most was that they could rewrite history. These are African American, the minority kids, and they were discovering that what happens if Africa colonized Europe? What happened if the Native Americans repelled European visits to this country? How much power would they have been able to rewrite history? And by doing the what ifs, they were able to think about history in a new way that opened it up as a series of decisions that had been made and not just facts and history books. And that's the exciting thing, is he found the kids were coming into class early and cheating. They were looking in the textbook. Right? The textbook became the cheat sheet for the game. And these kids were madly reading about the ancient Romans, trying to figure out what it is they did to get out of certain holes that they were getting into playing the game. So while Kurt was doing this research, we were working with students, faculty around the Institute. We went out and interviewed faculty. What's hard to teach? What could games do effectively? And we developed 15 conceptual prototypes, which are on our website, of video games. These are design docs and screen mock-ups at this point. But the idea is to make it more concrete. And the first thing we came away with was that right now a lot of the educational games are bad because the gameplay had nothing to do with what you're trying to learn. So the first principle we came up with was learning through gameplay. This is a psychology game where kids have to they're aliens and they're doing experiments to try to understand how the human brain works. But the gameplay itself and the fame of it allows you to begin to drill down more deeply on content. Talking to John Belcher in physics, we found out that they do a lot with simulations around electromagnetism, which turns to be a difficult subject matter for our students to learn. But the simulations students don't spend a lot of time with, so we turned those simulations into a game, electromagnetism game called Supercharged, and the idea was that it would motivate learning, that kids would spend more time with it, that they would develop experiential knowledge, they would play for a while, try to solve problems. Then Belcher or someone like him can go into the classroom and say, remember level 6, what problems did you run into, what worked, what didn't, well here's how it worked, let me show you the equation on the blackboard. Now go back and play it again and see if your score improves. And it's an organic process. It's not, we didn't put the equations in the game. Our philosophy is not all education takes place inside the box. There's a really active role for teachers, but we're able to do something pretty interesting. Games can create compelling roles. This is a health-based game. You're a virus traveling through the human bloodstream, and you've got to try to infect and kill your host. So this is a violence and video game, but maybe not what people have in mind, but you've got to fight around the antibodies. And what we've heard from doctors is they think this would be a very effective way of getting kids to think proactively about health, particularly kids with serious health problems, to reverse roles, to think as the virus and not as the body, and to have a different relationship to what's going on and understand what strengthens the body's defenses. We're very interested in peer-to-peer teaching and around games. And we worked with Woody Flowers to think about a game about robotics. And the idea here is you're terraforming a planet and you have to share knowledge with other players. And that creates a space where what you know about robotics has to be communicated with each other. We're trying to think outside of the box, and one of the things we've been working with Eric Kloffer in Urban Studies is working with us in developing handheld games that are played in the physical space of MIT. There's an imaginary chemical leak. We're trying to figure out what its source is, try to mediate it, and it's a role-playing game as much as it's a digital game, but they're using GPS satellite data tied to specific locations on campus, and they solve problems combining fictional data through the GPS and the physical environment, and they have to read those against each other. Now, one of the things we hear from the games industry a lot is they're afraid of the L word, learning, right? And they tell us education games don't sell. But in fact, if you look at the most successful video games of all time, they're top-heavy with educational titles. SimCity, Railroad Tycoon, various flight simulators, Age of Mythology. Leapfrog has become one of the most successful companies for young kids, and largely based on the pitch of education for parents. So in fact, there's a sense that there was a period of time when educational games were selling badly, in part because they were bad games, in part because they were bad educational models. Right? The paradox of this thing is that for a decade, educational games were only capable of drill and practice, and the educational philosophy was depth of understanding. Now they're capable of much more depth than you would ever imagine. But our educational philosophy is constrained by state and national standards in such a way that it's hard for teachers to imagine anything other than drill and practice in the classroom. And so they're being pushed to after-school programs, to homeschooling, to parents, but there's still an opening. Teachers, on the other hand, often say games don't teach. This is the first competition in robotics. It's a competition that many of you know about that is very successful. This is a website for the Model United Nations, which is, to my mind, one of the great social studies experience. It's a role-playing activity. But you don't just show up and play the game, right? You don't just show up at the United Nations. You spend weeks building for it. You do research. You do lectures. You do discussions. You play the game, and you come back and discuss it. It's integrated into the classroom activity. And so the expected games by themselves teach, I think, is the wrong model. But to imagine that you can do stuff with games that will teach in combination with other classroom activities is the right way to think. So here's what we're working on right now. So the game's called Revolution. As you can see, it's done in collaboration with Colonial Williamsburg. What you see is a sample of about 45 minutes of content we've developed so far. It's been done by 5 MIT Europs and 2 CMS grad students in less than a year for a budget of under $100,000. Now, most video games on the market today cost about $8 million to create. So this is a tribute to what MIT undergraduates can do. I'm incredibly proud of what they've accomplished so far. It's a game we're going to start testing in classes around Boston, in Muncie, Indiana, and Madison, and by next year in the LA Consolidated School Districts, getting into the classroom and seeing how kids respond to it. Now, the vision of the game is it's a multiplayer role-playing game, so that 9 kids can play at a time, each playing separate characters who represent different political factions within the town of Williamsburg on the eve of the American Revolution, different economic classes, different racial groups, different genders. So every kid will have a different experience of what Williamsburg was like, which they will then be able to bring into the classroom discussion. It's designed, if the class has computers for every student, you can have multiple games running parallel, so students will make different choices and be able to compare different experiences, or if there's a limited number of computers, kids will play up and play only one character. But the 45 minutes is not that's how far we could get, but it's designed to be playable in a class period, which is one of the things that distinguishes it from other games on the market. We've worked with historical, obviously a game is stylized, it doesn't show everything, but neither does a map, neither does a graph, neither does a chart. It shows some things very clearly. We've worked closely with Williamsburg to try to reproduce the historical buildings that were built in some detail. Most of the character names come from actual people who lived in Williamsburg during the period. The events we represent are reflected from the Virginia Gazette, which is a newspaper of the period, which is reproduced on the web, so people can go back in the classroom setting, read the primary documents, then go into the class, play the game with a sense of the community, and then go back and see how the game dealt with the issue. The first level of it deals with a moment in time when Lord Dunsmore, who was the royal governor, had confiscated all the guns in the community. And the community is trying to decide what to do about it. It turns out to be one of the incidents in American history that led to the right to bear arms being a central part of the Constitution. And we think that the controversy of that choice will obviously generate interest among students. This was a picture missing here, but the idea was to show you that even the objects in the house are based on physical objects found in Williamsburg. Now, one of the issues we faced was the fact that about 1/4 of the population in Williamsburg were slaves. We thought this is an over-the-place, simple, we do American Revolution, it's going to be patriotic, we'll be loved on the right and the left, we can have something that's taught in every school in America, we can avoid all the controversy. And we started reading and realized that we were no way to avoid the question of slavery when you're dealing with Williamsburg during that period of time. And so we worked with the current African-American literature on slavery to try to construct African-American culture in a sensitive way to make it a central part of the storyline, to have the relations and realities between those two worlds part of what's reflected, but also to reflect the dynamics of the social relations of the town through the AI design that we're working with, so that the characters trade information or share information with each other based on whether they would have talked to each other because of class, race, gender, and so forth. And we struggle with the question of, do you make the slave character something a kid plays? Should the slave master be something the kid plays? If you make either of them something the computer plays, you've dehumanized it. But the classroom dynamic of having a kid and play a slave and slave master is really loaded, and we're still struggling with that issue. At the moment, though, our sense is both should be played by human characters, and we have to think pedagogically about solving some of the problems there. Okay. So I think that's this. I'm just going to end there. That's one example of the kinds of projects we're working with. Let me just sum up some of the other pieces. We're doing more work with the handhelds and trying to develop toolkits that teachers can use to localize the games we build to specific schools. We're working to build a page where teachers share information about their experience teaching using games. We ran a major 2-day event at E3, the major trade show in the games industry, taking an educational message to the heart of the games industry. And we were standing room only, and we're invited back this year. And we're working with universities all over the country that are beginning to get excited about this vision of an Operation Frontal Lobe that uses games to teach. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank all of you. Before we open up for questions, I just have to have a couple of quick reactions here. One, Henry, is that about the first year I was president, I went down to visit the White House and spent an hour with the president's chief of staff. Found him sitting on a couch in his office with one of these little early handheld games, you move the cards around or something. And he looked at me and he said, when kids use these things, they're learning something. We could revolutionize education if we could do that. Of course, it was John Sununu, a good mechanical engineering graduate of MIT. I also, Shigeru, I just had to think while you were talking about Star Festival and its motivation. I'm about as lily white, male, all that stuff as one can get. But 3 years ago, when I was asked to make a few remarks at a Ramadan dinner held by our Muslim community on campus, who were, of course, going through very emotional times after 9/11, I suddenly remembered and said to them, you know, my great-grandparents came from Germany, and my father grew up in a German-speaking household in small-town America during World War I. I've heard all these things about people coming by the house and all. So there's something in all of this for us to learn. Floor is open for questions. Brief questions, address them to individuals if possible. And there are microphones floating around. Yes, sir.
Mr. Dick, you about OCW. I was wondering about the reaction of other universities to this program. In particular, has there been any interest in other universities in adopting a similar philosophy, particular universities that reflect different disciplines than MIT?
I didn't have a lot of time, but there was this last bullet on one of the slides where we mentioned about a consortium, open courseware consortium. The answer is yes. There are still many universities that are very interested in watching us, but a few have made a commitment to take all their material and doing OCW. I don't know if I'm at liberty to mention the names per se, but one of them is in a topic that MIT does not cover at all. It's in an area related to health. A major university, for example.
I want to ask about the shoemaker's children, and specifically, Shigeru, is your course available on his program? Clearly, I've seen you've been working with Henry, but I'm just wondering how far you and Dick have gotten to talking to each other.
Yes, much of what I showed you is on OpenCourseWare, and there'll be more as we learn to put more rich content on OpenCourseWare.
I want to also quickly say that Shigeru was one of the major thinkers on the committee that came up with the idea of OpenCourseWare. So he was with us, or with all of us, or he is one of us all along. Yeah.
So the woman here in
and
green.
To answer we've lagged a little behind because I was on leave for a year, and we're also struggling with some intellectual property issues of how do you represent media content in digital space when fair use is not well defined yet. So that's been a headache for us as we started to think about it, but we're trying to move to get more and more of our courses, and a lot of comparative media studies content is up there.
Henry, are you taking volunteers for schools as testing sites?
Absolutely. So grab me afterwards. We're going to get teachers who want to do this.
Okay.
Anybody on this side? Okay, well, let's stay right there.
Yeah, Henry, could you maybe critique an insight I've had that when kids start using games and even learning by games, that more traditional ways of getting things tend to get subjugated to being too boring. So if you start working on a game learning process, is it still possible for kids to use textbooks, or do they just dump it?
What we were finding is the kids who were playing Civilizations were opening the textbooks for the first time. That what it tends to do is create the games we're designing creates a hunger for more knowledge and more information in order to play them better. I didn't talk about the game we're doing with the Royal Shakespeare Company, which is based on the Tempest, and the goal there is to make it so that knowledge is only available in the play, such as what kind of juniper, the fact that Caliban eats juniper berries, is something that will give you a hedge up in the game. So we're trying to design games that do connect to traditional text and other media.
This is for Dick. You mentioned the simulation of the charged particles in electric fields and magnetic fields for John Belcher. Some of these simulation tools, in addition to being useful as pedagogical tools, can be useful as tools for consultants and things like that to solve problems for their customers. Where does the line get crossed between teaching and MIT giving people technology for free and things like that?
It's very simple actually. Of course, people benefit from the availability of OpenCourseWare. So if you benefit from it, that's fine. I think the not-for-profit provision of using OpenCourseWare is that you could not, for example, repackage it and sell the simulation to. Right? If using the simulation to benefits you, it's quite okay. It's knowledge that benefits you.
Dick, if I could go to the site for a particular course that the students actually use currently, how different would it look from the OCW site for the same one? And what's the difference between what the students are actually using this term and what they'd see if they went to OCW?
It depends, but let me give an example. See, the course I teach, what you find on OpenCourseWare is approximately 8 months outdated, or maybe a little bit more, because so the course that the material that my students now use are updated spontaneously, even maybe the night before the lectures are given and so forth. What the world sees are older exams. But I just want to tell you a really interesting story. It happened this week. My TA came and said, she was inundated by people having difficulty with the problems. And not because the problems we assigned were too difficult, but because this is a first-year graduate course. They came from all different backgrounds. They are not used to the style and tone and whatever we're trying to get out of them. And so I said to my TA, why don't we just send them to last year's site, and they will see all the examples of the last year's homework and their solutions. And then the student says, that's great. And that's exactly what they did. So they went and looked at it and said, okay, I know what you're talking about. That's what you mean when you say, give me the equation. You want that kind of equation. So yes, the answer is in many cases they are frozen in time and somewhat dated. But by and large, it's more or less what we use. There are things that are not shared. For example, student work sometimes could not be used without their permission. Student areas that privacy issues and so forth. But a lot of the content, many of us are quite prepared to use exactly the same.
Professor Miyakawa, what do you see as the direction of your project in the next several years? And I'm trying to remember the name of a project in Boston, the headquarters in Boston, who do the same thing in schools, teaching diversity, teaching problems between political, racial, religious groups. Where are you going, and what are your connections to these other groups doing the same thing?
One of the things that I'm interested in doing is to create applications where the young people are able to develop their own narrative freely. Right now, what I showed you is what we have for Star Festival. It's a non-linear narrative, but it's on a CD-ROM, and you cannot manipulate it. And so whenever we use this in the classroom, the teachers and the students ask for applications, an application that will allow young people to freely create their own personal narrative. And so this is what we're working on right now. As we do this, we want to start striking alliances with the kinds of organizations that you're talking about. We just signed on with a teacher training organization out of Colorado that teaches 1,000 K-12 teachers every year. And we are hoping to get our curriculum into their training program. And that will have a very large impact.
Professor Jenkins, I've read that there is a strong gender differentiation in affinity to game playing. Have you found that aspect in your own work, applying it to education?
Well, I literally wrote a book on this subject, From Barbie to Mortal Kombat, with Justine Cassell from the Media Lab, so I know a fair amount about it. And what we discovered, first of all, the gap has closed pretty significantly in the last decade. If you look at those 100% figures at colleges, that suggests women as well as men are playing. What we found when we put the games in the classroom so far, the supercharged, we had the most extensive classroom test, girls actually learned more from it than boys did, in part because their style of play was more collaborative. They talked to each other about what they were doing instead of competing, and the result is they had more peer-to-peer teaching, and it reinforced the lessons more. So my expectation was that the gender gap would be a serious one. The reality may be that the style of play more than compensates for it.
go on up.
Professor Yu, do you have problems with putting copyrighted material from the literature onto your sites in connection with courseware?
Yes. When we first thought about how to put this project into, to run it, we were thinking of all kinds of challenges. And I must say most of the challenges were overestimated by us in terms of cost and difficulty. There was one challenge that was underestimated by us, and that was the difficulty of allowing or to obtaining rights to third-party material that are materials that are now in the lectures. So we have now developed a repertoire, a very capable group of people and so forth, whose main job is to obtain these permissions, or sometimes to actually replace some of these figures and so forth. Sometimes we have to do that. But as we speak, this particular challenge, I was told by Anne Margulies, that is not as much of a challenge as we thought even a year ago. It's getting easier. It's getting better because we're getting good at understanding what it takes to get these permissions or not to try to get them at all.
Jorge?
Because any member of the panel, the thoughts of diversity that were shown and open courseware, we live in a world that has these clashes of cultures that is giving us a lot of troubles. And one can see that somehow maybe we'll take a new generation of thinking about how to perhaps the world change. Is anybody thinking about how some of this, like the discovery that Professor Nishikawa said about the other cultures, how some of these techniques might be used to really educate a new generation or live together, I guess, better?
As part of my participation in OpenCourseWare, I have been talking to some of the leaders in Asia who, in fact, are looking at OpenCourseWare. I just met with presidents from 6 top universities in Japan, and they have all looked at OpenCourseWare, which was quite amazing. They are interested in thinking of putting up their own material, but from an Asian perspective. And interestingly, even in things like material science, they feel that there are things particular to Asia which would be important for the world to know about. And so I think that we're going to start seeing through this initiative that MIT took with Chuck's leadership, the whole world opening up.
It's a cultural fact. We don't understand how the Asian cultures work. They don't understand how we work. You gave an illustration of how it is that a Chinese person was motivated to learn about the Japanese culture, and therefore that may have brought her closer to understand each other.
Yeah.
And so it just triggers. Is anybody thinking about how some of these, what all of you or three are talking about, the same kinds of things in some sense, can in the long term be used to expand our mutual knowledge of culture?
Well, one example, one of the prototypes I didn't show was, and it was one for engineering, which used the Three River Dam project in China as a case study to get engineers to think about the social, ethical dimensions of the work that they're doing. And we've been discussing with the Beijing Film Academy the prospect of collaborating with us and realizing that game so that our students and their students would work together. At the moment, it's a financial challenge because we just don't have the money to make it work yet. But it's something we would very much like to see, and we believe that games could be very effective at building bridges between people.
I just want to add that being an educational institution, I think the most likely area that we would make headway is in the educational sphere. And I think a project like OpenCourseWare has really created an atmosphere of sharing and mutual encouragement and so forth that I have not experienced in my many years as an educator. And I think it opens a sense that our willingness to share our material encourages them to likewise be willing in certain ways and in so forth. And this is across national boundaries and in this country as well.
All right, I had a question for Professor Jenkins. how do you feel with the involvement of industry involved in the education arcade? Obviously, some of the games that you showed us, like Civilization, aren't classically defined as an educational game, but nonetheless it is, given the fact that you have to think in order to use it. How do you envision industry getting more involved in the kinds of things that you're trying to do? And do you see any positive and or negative effects of such involvement?
Well, as I said, right now most of the games industry is a little terrified of the L word, and we're trying to educate them about the potential that can go on in that space. But we're already seeing one reason we were able to do Revolution so quickly and so cheaply was we're modifying an existing game, Neverwinter Nights, which is a fantasy role-playing game, and we've had some good cooperation from the company there and just opening up tool sets that allows us to build on what they've already built. We're seeing some game companies spend another extra month and generate new games based on games they've already built. There's an odd one called Typing of the Dead, where you zap zombies by typing words really fast. And it's being used at home, not in school, for typing education. But the other challenge we set up, right, and it seems to work, it's a bizarre game. The other thing that seems to be working is we're talking about developing teaching manuals to support the use of games that do have educational content, and I've been challenging the games industry to do this. It's long been practiced in Hollywood. When I was at E3, I showed the website for Disney's The Alamo, which had on the website study and teacher's guide available, and I challenged them to remember The Alamo and to try to do more to develop tools that allowed their games, even if they don't see education in the short term as their primary market, but in the long term, it can be something that can build a base of support around. So I think there's a lot industry can do. I think there's things industry is starting to do, but it's still an uphill battle on that front. And in the short term, it may be textbook publishers, it may be PC makers, maybe other groups that are going to fund what goes forward from here.
Professor Jenkins, outside of the video games that come out of your classes, is it true that 32% of your students are playing video games during your classes?
I like to think that we keep our students so engaged and so excited that they don't have any time to do it. But the reality is, if you look at it around a lecture hall today, there's an incredible amount of multitasking going on. The students are doing all kinds of things with their wireless computers we don't control. And I recently had a TA who was as good at that as they were, so he was blogging during my lectures, putting up the lecture notes, putting up links to relevant sites, so students could direct their attention to those sites while they were watching the class, and we kept their attention that way.
I guess my question for Fred, I guess two things, is there enough support, do you think, for the effort that faculty have to put into engaging fully with OCW? I mean, it's a lot more work, obviously, to put up and maintain a website and keep the site current. And in their course, when the website for their current course, is that also does the infrastructure from OCW help with that? And I guess my final question is, ultimately, if those of us who are lecturers, we want people to show up to class. So, I mean, if you're putting too much content on the web and it's too good, ultimately, nobody would come to class. I'm wondering if you're monitoring that, as you know.
Yeah. Let me real quick. The first one is, if you look carefully at the atlas and the distribution, the one continent that has very few number of hits is Africa, relative to many of the other countries. OCW was conceived with a strong aspiration to closing that kind of a gap worldwide. But unfortunately, or maybe the way it is, there really isn't a budget or agenda for us to do the kind of outreach that could be done with OpenCourseWare. I think this would have to be taken up by other agencies. And recently there have been conversations from government agencies and NGOs that are very interested to use OpenCourseWare to advance or help close this gap in Africa, in South Asia, and so forth. So that's the first question. Let me just skip to the last question in consideration of the time. When we went around to our faculty and talked about it, very few of them asked the question you asked. Most of them asked the question, could I teach better if I now put my notes and everything onto the web? And the answer was, It frees you from copying from your notes to the blackboard and from the students copying from the blackboard to their notes, so that you have now 55 minutes to do your thing. And so I would like to think, and I believe it's true, that most of our teaching has improved as a result of doing that.
You talked briefly about the support structure for the faculty, because everyone was not that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the one of the most of the effort on campus, Chuck just mentioned to me that a lot of the faculty were concerned as we went around talking to them before we decided to do this, was how much a burden would it be on their time and energy to do this. And so, having heard that, we have sort of designed a process on campus which really takes the onerous burden away from the faculty and put it into the OCW office. So OCW office has department liaisons, web experts, and so forth, so that the faculty actually the faculty members do not really take a lot of time to put it on OpenCourseWare. I think the average now could be down to less than a day of their time of involvement by using TAs and liaisons and other people. So that part they really liked. That was the other major concern when we walked around. Would it be sort of another sort of thing that they have to devote a lot of time to? Yeah.
Thank you for your brief, focused questions. We got a lot done, and please join me in thanking these remarkable faculty.